We're going to have a discussion here, guys, with the USA home front during the war. How did the United States win this war, and what was the home front like? Really, this is a war of production. We won essentially because we outproduced the Axis. Both the Russians and ourselves outproduced the Axis. And a lot of that occurred on the home front and was done with people that were not your typical workers, not the young men. We're talking about women and minorities that came in and took over these jobs. It was an all effort. This was a total war effort here in the United States. Very different than what we're going on right now. We were fighting two wars. We're fighting a war in Europe and a war in the Pacific. Costs a lot of money. How do we do that? Taxes and controls. Just like taxes today are controversial, taxes for Roosevelt was very controversial. We all know we needed high taxes. He tried to pose 100% tax on incomes over $25,000. That did not pass. But really, by 1944, almost the last year of the war, everybody was paying federal income taxes. Which just seems crazy these days, but in 1940, only 10% of people paid federal income taxes. Now it is the way it is. They also put price controls on the economy. They wouldn't let people gouge you for things are in short supply, so they wouldn't let people use a normal supply and demand market. And they also controlled wages. And they would not let you strike. So if you're a worker, your wage is not going to go up, and they're not going to let you strike until after the war is over, because it would hurt the war effort. So really, these next couple slides just talk about some of our production. I don't know if you could read this. This is a small slide, small writing. I have blown up on the following slides here, but this just shows you what we produce compared to what the Axis were produced. When we talk about allies, it's both the Soviets, the British, and us. So I'll go through some of these quickly here. Tanks. Soviet Union produced the most tanks in World War II. They produced 100,000 tanks. The parentheses is with big weapons. These are 75 millimeters. These are really what we would call tanks. Some of these other ones in here would be smaller ones. The United States produced 71,000 main tanks. Germany produced 37,000. So, if you look at Germany, they were far outproduced by both the United States and us. The UK, 27,000, and Japan, 2,500. No supplies. They had tanks, but they were really island-to-island campaign. They're not going to have the massive tank battles that we had in Europe. Military aircraft, we produced of all types. This is all types, 300,000 planes. Germany, 190,000. Soviet Union, 160,000. UK, 131,000. So again, Germany, Japan had 76,000. You would thought that they would have had more, but no. But again, if you look at the United States, Soviet Union, and the UK together, we far outproduced what the Axis produced in terms of planes of all types. Bombers, we had a massive bombing effort. We had almost 100,000 bombers. The British had 34,000 bombers. The Soviet Union, 21,000 bombers. So that's the big three for the Allies. Then you get to Germany and Japan, only 18 and 15,000 respectively. So again, this is paltry compared to what the United States and the Soviet Union was to produce. Aircraft carriers, which is, you name it. The 22, these are the biggies. These are what you would refer to as aircraft carriers. 141, we call these things corvettes. There are escort carriers. They're much smaller. They weren't able to produce to hold the normal number. So if you look at what we would think is aircraft carriers today, we had 22 of them, which is still a ridiculous amount. Japan had 16. We sank almost all of them. The UK had 14. Germany had none. None. That's not Germany's wheelhouse. They were fighting, for the most part, on land, and we were fighting with almost all of our, not all of them, but almost all of them were in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. Submarines. This is where Germany outproduced everybody else. They had 1,100 submarines. America 200. Japan 160. UK 160. Soviets even had 52. And even the Italians had 28. The only thing that the Germans or the Axis outproduced the Allies were in submarines, and that was for the Battle of the Atlantic. Merchant tonnage. How many tonnage did we ship? We shipped 33, almost 34 million tons of supplies. Again, most of those are going to Europe, and some of those are going to the Pacific. The UK shipped 6 million. Japan 4 million because they had their islands. Canada, the Commonwealth, and Italy. Germany didn't have to ship anywhere. Everything was on trains. But again, this is what won the war for us. We produced that stuff here in the United States, and then we were able to ship that to the people that needed it, and we were untouched. They couldn't touch us in terms of our factories. we were bombing poor Japan to dust and Germany down there. This gives you an idea. This is where some of these production facilities were. The larger the circle, that's the biggest of production facilities. We had them all over the place. This also has prisoner of war camps, and we had people spread out all over. But this was really an effort that went across the entire United States. Now, labor, workers, we talked about that. Unemployment was a huge problem during the Great Depression. It went down to virtually zero once the war started. We had millions of new jobs. All the young men were drafted or fighting, so we had women join the workforce. We also had minorities join the workforce. Roosevelt really said, and it cannot be understated, that the efforts of the civilians at home, all right, was critical to winning the war. That's what won the war for us. We weren't just inherently better. We just had better stuff. This is propaganda. The girl he left behind is still behind him. She's a wow, and it's a woman. And I can't read it, but what she's a woman who's basically working for him. So here's a soldier, and she's now working. Norman Rockwell had Rosie the Riveter. This is Rosie the Riveter, which is a symbol of all the women that were working in World War II. At home, legions of women, so they just kind of call them all Rosie the Riveter. And then Rockwell did a couple pictures, and the problem was a lot of these women, they enjoyed it. They got out of their traditional roles, and at the end of the war, they were supposed to just go back to being their normal house mom self. And that for a lot of times that happened, but people, I think the cat was out of the bag, and they had some social issues come as a result of that. Here's Norman Rockwell, Saturday Evening Post cover of Rosie the Riveter. She's looking some pretty manly arms, and she's dirty, but she is helping the country, and that's a big rivet gun that she is holding. And this is, really who's winning the war for the United States at home. Now, agriculture, you still had to feed the army. A lot of farmers were exempted out of the draft because they needed them home. A lot of people went and volunteered in the factory for jobs. So in some areas, it was so desperate that schools closed during harvest time because the kids needed to go and help their parents. And a lot of prisoners of war, especially German prisoners of war, were brought in and used as farm labor to help us in our farming, because agriculture, again, it's not very shiny. You can't shoot a potato, but you need that to feed the army and keep the country going. So civilians, they had a civilian air patrol. They also had a equivalent in the Coast Guard. They were established, used as spotters, search and rescue. They had towers. Here where I teach at La Jolla High School, in La Jolla, there are some search towers, bunkers built. Every city practiced blackouts. It didn't matter where you were. You could have zero chance of getting bombed, but they would still do a blackout. They would also still have civilian air spotters in these, the football field in the middle of Iowa, looking for planes. And that was just for morale. A lot of people felt inept. They felt like they couldn't give anything to the war effort. So if they were at least doing their part, it made them feel better. And that's really why they did it. It was pretty successful. These, again, in the plain states, people were watching the night skies for aircraft with zero possibility of getting bombed, but they felt like they're doing something. The USO was formed, still around today. This was set up to help the morale of military personnel. They would bring, like Bob Hope, famous actors, comedians, would come over and do shows for the guys. They also had Salvation Army, the YMCA, the YWCA, among others, to help support the troops. And the USO was incorporated in 1941, and it's still around today as a wonderful organization to help our troops. Rationing began in earnest right at the beginning. Tires were the first thing to be rationed. They needed them for the military. Pretty much everything was from sugar, gasoline, bicycles, coffee, stoves, meat, you name it. All that was rationed. The way it worked, you got a book, one book per member of the family. And they had little stamps in it, and you would have your sugar stamp for the month of April 1942, and then you buy your allotment of sugar, you get the stamp, and then you're done. And they didn't do one per family, they did one per person in family, so it's all even. So you can't have a family of 3 that gets the same amount as a family of 6. Each member of the family got an allotment, and they would have these books. They're still around today. Kind of interesting if you ever buy one. Most of the stamps are gone, of course, because people use them. But rationing really brought it home to people that they were in the war. Now, Interestingly enough, the baby boom came right out of this, and it's not part of World War II, but it's a direct consequence. Birth rate started shooting up after 41, and really, as soon as these guys came back, 12 million men, 12 million soldiers came back that made it through the war. They came home and they had families, they had babies, and they had a huge bubble of babies come out. And those people these days are all retiring, and demographics are shifting. So the baby boom was part of this. So I hopefully that gives you just an opportunity to just see kind of what was going on at the home front. It is obviously more complicated than I was able to tell you in this short amount of time. Do some research. It's interesting to see how people at home dealt with living World War II.